There's a guy who gets a promotion. First thing he does is tell his wife they should finally get the nicer car. They've been driving the same sedan for 6 years. They deserve it. His coworker just got a Tesla. His neighbor just refinanced and redid the kitchen. His college roommate posted photos of a vacation in Italy that got 340 likes. He's doing well financially, better than he was 3 years ago, and somehow he feels further behind than ever. Not behind on bills. Not behind on payments. Behind on something harder to define and impossible to satisfy. Behind on the invisible scoreboard that nobody created officially and nobody can explain clearly, but everybody is playing against whether they know it or not. That feeling has a name. It has a mechanism. It has a cost that can be calculated in real dollars and in real years of your life. And the reason most people never escape it is not because they lack willpower or discipline or financial knowledge. It's because the system producing that feeling is sophisticated, omnipresent, and specifically engineered to be stronger than willpower. You are not losing a personal battle. You are losing a rigged game you never agreed to play. And the first step to stopping the damage is understanding exactly how the game works and who benefits from you playing it. Here's what we're covering today. I'm going to show you the exact psychological mechanism that turns your neighbor's new car into a threat your brain processes the same way it processes physical danger. I'll walk through what this costs in actual dollars over a working lifetime, and the number is going to be larger than you expect. I'll explain what's happening in America right now in 2026 that has made this problem dramatically worse than it was for any previous generation. And I'll give you the specific framework for stepping off the scoreboard without feeling like you're losing, because that feeling of losing is the trap, and until you dismantle it, the financial advice doesn't stick. Think of your social environment like a thermostat. A thermostat has one job. It reads the current temperature and adjusts the system to match a target. Your brain has a social thermostat, and it works the same way. It constantly scans your environment, reads what the people around you have, and generates discomfort when your situation falls below that ambient level. That discomfort is the signal to adjust, to spend, to upgrade, to close the gap between what you have and what the thermostat has decided is the correct temperature for someone in your position. The thermostat isn't malicious. It evolved over hundreds of thousands of years when social standing within a group was directly tied to survival. Falling below the group standard wasn't an emotional inconvenience in that environment. It was a genuine threat. Your brain still processes it that way. The anxiety you feel when your car is the oldest one in the parking lot or your kitchen looks dated compared to your sister's renovation is not vanity. It is an ancient survival signal misfiring in a modern consumer environment. Understanding that doesn't make the signal go away, but it changes what you do with it. Here is where it gets financially devastating. The thermostat doesn't adjust to what your group actually has. It adjusts to what your group displays. And what your group displays has almost no relationship to what your group actually owns, earns, or can afford. The neighbor with the renovated kitchen may have put it on a home equity line of credit they will spend a decade repaying. The coworker with a Tesla has a $1,100 monthly payment that is quietly preventing him from contributing meaningfully to his retirement account. The college roommate in Italy put the trip on a credit card at 22% interest and is still paying for it 4 months later. You are not comparing yourself to your peers' financial reality. You are comparing yourself to their financial performance. The curated, selective, highlight reel version of their financial life that they present to the world, while the actual numbers stay private. You are running a race against an opponent whose real position is hidden and whose displayed position is engineered to look as strong as possible. And you are sacrificing real money to close a gap that in many cases doesn't actually exist. The research on this is extensive and consistent. A study published in the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization found that lottery winners' neighbors were significantly more likely to make large conspicuous purchases and take on additional debt in the years following the lottery than neighbors of non-winners. They weren't responding to a change in their own financial situation. They were responding to a change in the perceived financial standard of their immediate social environment. Their thermostat recalibrated, and their spending followed automatically. Another study tracking social spending patterns found that for every dollar increase in income among the top earners in a zip code, middle-income households in that same zip code increased their own spending measurably even when their income didn't change. The spending wasn't funded by higher earnings. It was funded by lower saving and higher debt. The people around them got richer on paper, and they responded by getting poorer in reality, trying to keep pace with a standard they couldn't actually afford. This is not a character flaw. This is a documented, reproducible, predictable human behavioral response to social environment. Which means your financial future is being substantially determined not by your income, not by your intelligence, not by your discipline in isolation, but by the spending behavior of the specific people you happen to be surrounded by. The zip code you live in, the office you work in, the social media feeds you consume. These environments are setting your financial thermostat, and your brain is executing the adjustment whether you consciously authorize it or not. Now, let's put actual numbers on what this costs, because the abstract psychological explanation only goes so far. The average American household spends approximately $1,200 to $1,800 per year on what researchers call social signaling expenditures. These are purchases made primarily or substantially because of how they will be perceived by others rather than because of the functional value they provide. A car that is newer or more expensive than transportation requires. Clothing brands that signal status rather than provide additional utility. Home renovations timed to match or exceed what neighbors recently did. Vacations photographed and shared rather than experiences chosen for personal enjoyment. Restaurants selected for their social currency rather than the food. That range of $1,200 to $1,800 annually is almost certainly an underestimate because it relies on self-reporting, and people systematically underestimate the degree to which social signaling drives their spending. But even using the conservative number, $1,200 per year invested instead of spent at 7% annual returns over 30 years produces approximately $113,000. $1,800 per year produces $170,000. That is the financial cost of the minimum version of keeping up. The realistic version, which includes the car upgrade, the kitchen renovation, the vacation that got posted, the wardrobe refresh, is substantially higher. Let me give you a more concrete scenario because the annual spending number undersells the real damage. The real damage happens in the large episodic decisions, not the small recurring ones. Marcus and his wife earn a combined $140,000 per year. They live in a suburb of a mid-sized city. Their neighbor buys a new truck. Their close friends renovate their house. 3 couples in their social circle take a group vacation to Mexico, and the photos are everywhere for 2 weeks. Marcus and his wife are doing fine financially, but the thermostat is running hot. They decide to finally redo the bathrooms they've been putting off. $22,000 financed on a home equity line at 8.5%. They lease a newer car because the current one is getting older and honestly they deserve something nicer. $780 per month, 36-month lease. They book a vacation, not Mexico, but a long weekend in Charleston, modest by comparison, $2,400 on a credit card. Each decision felt reasonable. Each decision was triggered substantially by social environment rather than genuine need or carefully considered priority. The total new monthly obligation is approximately $1,600 when you add the lease payment and the home equity line payment. Their savings rate drops from 14% to 6%. They don't notice immediately because the income is still coming in and the lifestyle feels justified. Over the next 10 years, that drop in savings rate, from 14% to 6% of $140,000 annual income, cost them approximately $11,200 per year in reduced investment contributions. Over 10 years at 7% compounding, that is roughly $154,000 in lost wealth. Not counting the interest they paid on the debt they took on. Not counting the lease they signed for a car that built zero equity. $154,000 in lost future wealth for a bathroom renovation, a car lease, and a long weekend in Charleston. Each of which felt completely reasonable at the time, and none of which significantly improved their actual quality of life once the initial novelty wore off. This is the mechanism. Not one catastrophic decision. A sequence of individually defensible decisions, each triggered by social comparison, each carrying a compounding cost that never appears on the receipt. Now, let me tell you what is happening in America in 2026 that has made this problem orders of magnitude worse than it was for previous generations, because this is not just a timeless human psychology story. There are specific structural forces at work right now that are amplifying the mechanism in ways that are genuinely new. The first force is social media at scale. Previous generations experienced social comparison within a physically bounded social environment. You compared yourself to your neighbors, your coworkers, your family members, maybe a few hundred people whose lives you had some visibility into. The comparison was real, but it was limited by geography and proximity. Social media has dissolved those limits entirely. The average American now has visibility into the consumption patterns and lifestyle displays of thousands of people simultaneously. And the algorithm that determines what you see is not neutral. It is specifically optimized to show you content that generates engagement, which means it preferentially surfaces the most aspirational, the most impressive, the most envy-inducing content in your network. Not the average, not the realistic, the peak. You are not comparing yourself to the median financial life of your peers. You are comparing yourself to an algorithmically curated highlight reel of the best moments of the most impressive lives in your extended social network, presented continuously in real time, designed to maximize the emotional response that keeps you scrolling. Your social thermostat is being set by an input that is systematically biased toward the most expensive, most aspirational version of what people around you are doing. And then you make financial decisions in response to that distorted signal. The second force is the complete normalization of financing consumption. Previous generations had clearer psychological friction around debt. Borrowing money to buy something you couldn't afford felt like a last resort rather than a standard transaction. That friction has been systematically removed. Buy now, pay later services have made installment financing available at the point of purchase for items as small as a $40 clothing purchase. Credit card rewards programs have reframed debt as a tool for getting something for free rather than a mechanism for paying a 20% premium on everything you buy. 0% financing for 18 months has trained an entire generation to think of debt as free money rather than a time-shifted expense. The result is that the gap between what people can afford today and what they can appear to afford today has never been larger. And the gap between what people display financially and what they actually own financially has never been wider. Your social thermostat is calibrating to a displayed standard that is substantially funded by debt that is invisible to you. The third force is the physical environment of American consumer culture, which has been engineered across decades to make spending the path of least resistance and saving an active, effortful choice that requires constant recommitment. Every physical and digital commercial environment you move through is designed by professionals with enormous resources whose singular goal is to convert your attention into a purchase. The sophistication of that engineering in 2026, using behavioral data, personalized targeting, and psychological research accumulated over decades, is genuinely without historical precedent. You are not exercising individual willpower against generic advertising. You are exercising individual willpower against systems built by teams of behavioral scientists using your own psychological profile against you. Willpower alone was never going to be sufficient against that asymmetry. It is a now. Here is the framework for actually getting off the scoreboard, because everything I've described so far is diagnosis, and diagnosis without direction is just anxiety with better explanations. The first step is making the invisible scoreboard visible. Most people are playing it unconsciously. They don't think of themselves as keeping up with anyone. They think of their spending decisions as independent choices made for legitimate personal reasons. The bathroom renovation was necessary. The car was practical. The vacation was needed for mental health. All of those justifications may be partially true. The question that makes the scoreboard visible is this: would you have made this decision at this time if none of the people in your social environment could see it or know about it? If the honest answer is probably not, or not as soon, or not at this price point, then the decision was substantially social rather than personal. You were buying for the scoreboard. Seeing that clearly is uncomfortable. It is also the only way to start making decisions that serve your actual future rather than your social thermostat. The second step is auditing your comparison environment, because the thermostat responds to its inputs and you have more control over the inputs than you think. Social media feeds can be curated. Accounts that consistently generate social comparison anxiety can be unfollowed without drama or explanation. The research on this is clear. Reducing social media consumption measurably reduces social comparison spending within months. This is not a radical life change. It is an input adjustment that changes what your thermostat is responding to. You can also be intentional about the physical social environment you spend time in. People who consistently socialize with others who have dramatically higher consumption standards gradually recalibrate their own spending upward to maintain social comfort. People who spend time with others who share their values around financial independence, delayed gratification, and conscious spending find that their own financial behavior improves without requiring additional willpower. Your environment is setting your standard. You are allowed to choose your environment. The third step is replacing the external scoreboard with an internal one and making the internal one visible enough to compete with the external one. The external scoreboard is powerful partly because it is concrete and immediate. The new car is visible every time you pull into the driveway. The renovated kitchen is present every morning. The vacation photos accumulate likes in real time. Your investment account balance and your net worth and your progress toward financial independence are abstract, delayed, and socially invisible. Nobody gives you 340 likes for automating an additional $400 per month into your index fund. The dopamine response to financial discipline is weak and delayed compared to the dopamine response to a visible consumption upgrade. The way to address this imbalance is to make your financial progress concrete, visible, and emotionally resonant in the same way the external scoreboard is. Track your net worth monthly. Post it somewhere private but visible to you. Calculate what your current portfolio will be worth in 10, 20, 30 years, and put that number somewhere you see it regularly. Make the future real and present rather than abstract and distant. The more visceral and visible your internal scoreboard becomes, the more it can compete with the external one for the behavioral decisions that determine your financial trajectory. The fourth step is the most psychologically difficult one, but also the most liberating. Decide explicitly what your life actually needs to cost to be genuinely satisfying and defend that number against every upward pressure your environment generates. Not the life that impresses your social circle. Not the life that matches the ambient consumption standard of your zip code or your office or your Instagram feed. The life that, when you examine it honestly and privately, actually makes you feel good. For most people, that life costs significantly less than the life they are currently funding. Research on life satisfaction and spending consistently shows that beyond a moderate income threshold, additional spending produces rapidly diminishing returns on reported happiness, while the financial stress of maintaining high spending produces persistent, measurable reductions in well-being. The people around you who appear to have more are frequently less happy than they look and more financially stressed than they show. The gap you are sacrificing your future to close is in many cases not producing the well-being in them that you are imagining from the outside. Here is the most important thing to understand about getting off the scoreboard. The people you are trying to keep up with are not watching you as closely as you think. They are managing their own thermostat, responding to their own social environment, funding their own social signaling, and occasionally glancing at what you are doing to recalibrate their own position. The scoreboard feels personal because the anxiety is personal, but the game is impersonal. It is a collective hallucination that everyone is participating in and nobody designed intentionally, and everyone is paying for. You can stop paying for it. Not by becoming someone who doesn't care what others think, which is not how human psychology works, but by becoming someone who sees the mechanism clearly enough to pause before the thermostat triggers automatic spending behavior, ask whose life the purchase is actually for, and make the decision consciously rather than reactively. Here are your 3 takeaways. 1. The feeling of falling behind your peers is not an accurate reading of your relative financial position. It is a psychological response to a socially displayed standard that is substantially funded by debt and curated to appear better than it is. You are comparing yourself to a performance, not a reality. Decisions made in response to that feeling transfer real money from your future to a gap that in many cases doesn't actually exist. 2. This problem is structurally worse in 2026 than at any previous point in American history because of the combination of algorithmic social media that preferentially surfaces aspirational content, the normalization of debt financing for consumption, and consumer targeting systems of unprecedented sophistication. Willpower alone has never been sufficient against these forces, and it isn't now. The solution is environmental and structural, not motivational. 3. Decide what your life actually needs to cost to be genuinely satisfying and build your financial behavior around that number rather than around the ambient consumption standard of your social environment. The gap between those two numbers, invested consistently over time, is the difference between financial freedom and financial fragility. That gap is yours to keep. Every time you spend it to close a social distance that doesn't actually matter, you are trading a real future for an imaginary standing on a scoreboard nobody officially keeps but everybody unofficially pays for. The guy with the promotion who bought the nicer car because his coworker had a Tesla is not stupid or weak or bad with money. He is human. He responded exactly the way human beings respond to social environment. The question is not whether the signal will fire. It will. The question is whether you see it clearly enough to pause before it becomes a purchase. That pause, practiced consistently, is worth more than any investment strategy, any budgeting system, or any financial advice you will ever receive. Because the best financial plan in the world doesn't work if the social thermostat keeps overriding it every time someone in your orbit upgrades their kitchen.